table. Trevor Matich, ESPN College Football Insider, on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline. Trevor, welcome back to BYU Sports Nation.
Great, thanks. Great to be back. Another win. It's a good morning all the time when they win the weekend before.
BYU 5-2. We're trying to figure out what specifically is making BYU so successful in the fourth quarter. Where do you start with that, Trevor?
Well, where they would start is the honor code, where players are asked not to, and all BYU students, not to put certain things in their body, alcohol, tobacco, illegal drugs, things like that. And I've talked at length with Coach Mendenhall and other coaches there and the strength staff over the last several years about what that means for their conditioning program. They believe that because of the honor code, because of the way these kids live, they should be able to get that last extra measure of conditioning out of their performance, because their bodies are more pure from a standpoint of those things relative to the honor code than a lot of players that they play against. And so they use high technology with heart monitoring and stress tests and things like that to be able to train players to the highest level possible of human conditioning without going over the top and then having diminishing returns. So they mate the honor code with the high tech. Now, part of the way they do that in training is that rather than go with traditional football weight training with heavy weights and heavy squats and lots of sprints, and then you rest, and then you sprint, and then you rest, they've gone to more of an Australian rugby style training, where they will sprint and then jog, and never really stop. And so they train their bodies to be able to play at a higher percentage of their potential for a longer period of time, rather just burst and rest, and then the height of the bursts having been diminished later in the fourth quarter. BYU trains because of the honor code and because of their new style of go fast, go hard, more like a rugby team will train than an American football team will train. And when you put that all together in the fourth quarter, they get a higher potential or a higher percentage of their potential onto the field.
And I'm seeing chunk plays as well for BYU, particularly in the run game. For whatever reason, in the fourth quarter, the run game has turned into something that's been really positive. Boise State, it kicked in. And then in this game, BYU carries the ball 13 times for 91 yards and 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. As a former offensive lineman, what are you seeing from BYU that's making them so effective in the run game in the fourth?
Well, there's no greater feeling for an offensive lineman than to be late in a game and know that your opponent is gassed and that you have the physical advantage, and you know it and they know it. And when that ball is snapped, you lock up and you dominate that guy. That's the greatest feeling in the world for an offensive lineman. But it's an investment. You have to invest in running the ball earlier in the game, even when it's not working like you want it to get to that point. And what happens to the defense is when they fatigue, and if they fatigue faster than the offense does, then they will have a lot more trouble doing two things that are critical to stopping the run. One is shedding blocks. You've got to get off of blocks and in front of the running back. And it's harder to do when you're more fatigued and the blocker blocking you has more energy than you do. The second thing is arm tackles. When you are not getting off of blocks, you are reaching out with your arm. And when you've got big running backs like BYU does, running through arm tackles of defenders that are now a bit fatigued, all of a sudden it's easier to break out into the open space, and then you get more yards after the initial contact. Because the initial contact is no longer as often a defender standing in front of you and you have to run through him. It's more often going to be his arm out there that you can run through. And that does have a relationship with the training and with fatigue and with the fact that BYU not only is in better condition to do that in the fourth quarter, but rather they know it, and the mental advantage they get from that is just massive.
Trevor Matich, ESPN College Football Insider, back for another Matich Monday on BYU Sports Nation. Trevor, how much of BYU's success should be credited to the team and the players buying in and taking increased leadership roles?
That's a big deal. It was emphasis from the coaching staff from last year to this to challenge leaders in the locker room to rise up and take ownership of this team, and they've done so. people complain about coaches when they can't move and motivate the players, but the truth of it is coaches can only do so much from the top down. And it's the players in the locker room that have to ultimately rally around the leaders that they have basically chosen for themselves to follow. And for those leaders to make sure the guys are focused tightly on the right things. And this is something that you see with this BYU team. Marco Mendenhall has talked about how in the fourth quarter of games they just seem to get more determined. They seem to get more urgent. They seem to ratchet it up, that one extra gear that nobody thought they had. But you can't do that if you're being driven from behind by a coach. You can only do that if you look at each other's eyes as players, as teammates, and say, we need this. I will give you, my teammate, everything I've got. Then you see the look in their eye as they commit the same back to you, and all of a sudden you get a synergy going on that cannot happen from the outside. It's got to happen organically within the team itself, and this BYU team has responded to the coaching staff's challenge to develop that kind of locker room leadership.
If Taysom Hill and Jamal Williams were healthy, I would have been happy with 5-2. Neither are on the team, yet BYU is 5-2. What has been the most impressive part of that to you?
Well, I think it's been the way that they have fought back from the two losses. The UCLA loss, 1 point, so many plays that one play could have gone the other way, and BYU wins that game. And then they go out to Michigan, and they were kind of wiped out physically and emotionally and everything at that one, and ran into a buzzsaw. Michigan coming into its own. That was a point where this BYU team could have lost focus and lost interest in some ways, and just gone through the motions. But they didn't. We talk so much about the X's and O's, and those are important. I mean, the receivers have really stepped up. The pass rush has carried the defense in a lot of ways. I mean, they've been and the secondary has responded to that pass rush in ways that we'll continue to be talking about. But ultimately, I think when they had the chance, the opportunity to not really legitimately, but to at least have a decent excuse to kind of check out a little bit and start to go through the motions after losing 2 in a row, they doubled down in the positive way, and they put it back together. And that's what's impressive to me. I love the X's and O's of the game. But when you're on the sideline, in the huddle, looking at the eyes of your teammates when you're fatigued and beaten and bruised and bloody and tired, and you see guys that will not quit, then all of a sudden everybody gets into that mode, and the whole is so much more than the sum of the parts. And that thing is something that can't be taught. It's something that you want to have, but you can't make it happen. It's the character of a football team, and that is the character of the individuals. And the most impressive thing to me is how they themselves have revealed themselves to have that character as individuals and as a group.
Trevor Matich of ESPN with us on BYU Sports Nation. Tanner Mangum battled through a hamstring issue or injury, whatever you want to call it, to put together a pretty gutty performance in that win over Cincinnati. Now BYU has Wagner, a winless FCS team, and a bye week after that. So should Tanner Mangum play against Wagner?
Wouldn't be a bad idea to go out for a series or two and just kind of break a sweat, work on a few things in terms of timing. It'll be more of a scrimmage than anything else for him, but just work on a couple of things and then get off the field. And it would have been nice if this would have come at the end of September, but the scheduling didn't work out that way. BYU now, for the first time all season, will have a chance to get that kind of rest, and I think it's not just Tanner Mangum who will get that rest, it's others. And where it also helps is that others will have a chance to go in and get some meaningful minutes now, because BYU has been in so many nail biters, all of them really, except for Michigan, that a lot of the young depth has not had a chance to go in and really get good, meaningful minutes. And they will in this game against Wagner. So it goes well beyond just resting the starters. It's also getting the depth, the experience that they'll need to be able to come in and contribute more as the season goes on.
Trevor, you famously said it 2 years ago on this show, don't sleep on Idaho State, and then we had fun with that with Savannah State. So would you like to give us that soundbite for this year with Wagner?
Yeah, don't sleep on Wagner. They're due. They haven't won a game all year. They're due, boy. They're ready to explode. What you really have to do is make sure you don't.
The bye week.
What?
This is a trap game for the bye week.
I know, but yeah, it's a trap game because then San Jose State's after that. You never know what you're looking ahead to. But not to be disrespectful to Wagner, because they work as hard as anybody does. But just to say that, but it's okay. Wagner knows. Wagner understands. They're coming to play this game for their own reasons, and that's fine. But BYU BYU deserves this. It's actually better than a bye week because you're preparing for a game, but you're now preparing your backups as if they were starters, and that's a good thing.
That's a great way to phrase it. It's better than a bye week. For marketing purposes this week, we're just calling it the Seahawks. BYU versus the Seahawks.
I like that. Boy, And if they get a win over the Seahawks, imagine recruiting for that.
The Seattle Seahawks only have 2 more wins than Wagner. I'm just saying that right now. That's my team, so it's not going well.
So you're saying basically the Redskins should schedule the Seattle Seahawks for homecoming next year, is that it?
Yes, they should for homecoming, exactly. Let's open it up national. Who are your top 4 teams right now that you'd put in the playoff if it started today?
Well, if it started today, the top 4 teams that I think Alabama is playing better than any team in the country right now. Their offense seems to be coming together. Their quarterback situation is still evolving, but they've got some receivers that are starting to emerge, and they're getting better. And their defense is smothering. It's like a big old anaconda that just wraps around you and crushes your hope.
Bad movie,
it's amazing.
But great analogy.
Yeah, it's fantastic to watch them play. Baylor, I still think Baylor will win it all. You know, they're and they would be in that group. Utah would be in that group because of both the way that they're playing and the way and who they've beaten. You know, they've got a good body of work and a good resume. Then the 4th team is the toughest one, and right now I would put Ohio State in there at number 4.
You have to.
Yeah, well, it's not you kind of have to, I guess. But the thing is, what's concerned me has been the way their offense has performed, where they've taken too long to get going against weaker teams. They've had to wait until the weaker team has been fatigued in the second half before they really began to break out. That worried me. It also worried me that even though their numbers are great, they lead the Big Ten in points per game and yards per rush. When you look at how they get those yards per rush, they bust off 80-yard touchdowns, and then they'll get stuffed the next 9 runs in a row. That gets you behind the chains. It's not very good. Well, against this Penn State defense this last weekend, they actually performed against a very good defense at a different level. I think Ohio State now is ready to make that run and be the team that we saw last year.
ESPN's Trevor Matich with us on BYU Sports Nation. I can't remember a time when there were 4 ranked non-P5 teams and one of them wasn't Boise State. Memphis, Toledo, Houston, Temple, all in the AP Top 25. BYU 2 out of that poll, Trevor. Who's the best non-P5 team right now?
Besides Notre Dame.
I think Memphis is actually. Paxton Lynch is a quarterback that is high on NFL draft boards, and I think just because of that alone, when you've got a quarterback like that, you can overcome a lot of other deficiencies. I think Memphis is that team. I think BYU fans know that Memphis is a very tough physical team based on what they saw in the bowl game last year. I think Memphis is that team that's the best of that group of 5. Now, unless something changed, Memphis and Temple and that group has an advantage that BYU does not for the New Year's Six, in that the highest ranked of the group of 5 conferences and teams get an automatic berth to the New Year's Six bowls. And they don't even have to be in the top 25. They can be ranked number 55. If they're the highest ranked of those conferences and those teams, they're in. That's it. BYU right now as an independent does not get that consideration. So they could be ranked higher than any of those teams we're talking about and still not get an automatic berth. But what BYU can do, if they continue to win, and if they get some help from other teams losing, they could get themselves ranked highly enough, and they could get themselves attractive enough to get consideration from the New Year's Six bowls to be put in as an at-large team. That's not out of the realm of possibility, and that's why, looking back, you know, there's a lot of football left to be played, and BYU would have to win out. But looking back at that one-point loss at UCLA, if BYU doesn't become an at-large team for the New Year's Six, that's the game you'd look back at. You know, but in the meantime, right now, for fans, because the team doesn't think this way. They think 1 week at a time. But for fans, there is a pathway for BYU to get into the New Year's Six. But they would have to win out, and they would have to get some help now because they do have 2 losses, and they don't have, unless something changes I don't know about, they don't have the consideration of the automatic berth.
Wow, you just dropped a bomb, and BYU fans are going to go nuts with this.
Well, I said they could. I didn't say they would. You know, I said they could.
Trevor, great to talk to you as always. Matich Monday, never disappointing. We'll talk to you again soon.